Hello everybody and welcome back to Let's Play ChäoS. Let's go ahead and get my timer started. Ban read a file with ferocious intensity in Frisia's reception room, although it was one in name only, being a narrow space set apart by shelving. Opposite him, Yua shrank into herself where she sat. She had been incessantly peeking at Ban's expression for a while now. She was the very picture of a child showing her report card to her parent. Ban was reading a report on everything Yua had investigated up until now regarding the new-gen cases in Nishijo Takumi, including things like a log of the chat between Takumi and Shogun on the day before the staking incident. Yua had concluded that Takumi really was the true new-gen culprit.
すごいわね。これ全部一人で調べたの？
Yua lowered her face apologetically, even in response to Momose's words of admiration. She ended up gazing at the bag she'd left at her feet and the Gero froggy straps that hung from it. She was dealing with a detective and the president of an investigations company. They were the ultimate of pros when it came to investigating. It would be unavoidable for these two to regard as child's play any information Yua, a mere ordinary high school girl, had independently discovered. But Ban, like Momose, was impressed by the high quality of her report.
なかなかいい着眼点だ。よく調べたな。とりわけこの西条匠の多重性ってのが興味深い。西条匠は多重人格であり、オリジナルとなった西条匠の人格が眠っている時、つまり他の人格が活動中に事件を起こしている。
Which, in that case, I think you'd somewhat struggle to get a actually good conviction that would not be able to be overturned on appeal, realistically.
本当に面白いわ。まあでも、ちょっとばかり現実離れしすぎてるかな。
Exactly. It seems a little unlikely that somebody would, go to sleep and then different personality decides to effectively sleepwalk and go and murder a whole bunch of people.
刑事さんは、西条くんのこと、犯人だって考えてないんですか?
Well, technically he said nothing of the sort there, with that, in that regard at least. Just that, your idea of how the events play out seems a little fantastical.
はっきり言っていいかい?
Yua nodded, her face going a bit stiff.
警察じゃ西条匠は容疑者として見ていない。
Okay.
へえ、そうなの。
Not only Yua, but also Momose widened her eyes. Ban grinned ruefully, leaning against the back of the sofa. He folded his hands behind his head.
少なくとも貼り付け事件じゃ西条は白だ。遺体を貼り付けていた杭には指紋がべったり付着しててな。西条の指紋を手に入れて照合してみたんだが、全く合致しなかった。
Yua immediately went pale and her lips started trembling. Now that everything she believed had come clattering down, guilt over the horrible things she said to Takumi advanced on her heart.
杭にあった指紋から容疑者についてはほぼ固まってんだ。
Oh?
まだマスコミにも公表してないけどな。
You have me intrigued.
ちなみにそれ、諏訪のお手柄だったりする。
諏訪ちゃんは頑張ってるっていうのに、バンちゃんはよくここでのんびりしていられるわね。
Yeah, Sua seems to be doing a good enough job on his own.
実は俺、捜査本部から外されたんだわ。
はあ？
本来の捜査サボって G レートのこととか調べてんの上司にバレちゃってな。
That was the reason why Ban wanted to tell his junior Sua that there was no need to go as far as calling to inform him of the seventh case.
あんたね、もっとうまく立ち回りなさいよ。まあ、バンちゃんに G レートのことを教えた私にも責任はあるけど。
気にすんなって。それに G レートの件は個人的にも気になってたんだ。まあ、西条にしても貼り付け以外の事件じゃまだ捜査線上にいる。
Which would imply that either A, you for some reason believe that the staking is not related to the new gen cases, or that potentially there are multiple people that execute the murders that are part of the new gen cases. As a result, Takumi may have done all the other ones, at least, in your mind, but he did not specifically do the staking.
もしかするとユアちゃんの推理が正しいかもしれん。
ニュージェネは同一犯による連続殺人事件じゃないって警察は考えてるの？
Well, technically, would it not be possible to have serial killings conducted by a group? They do have a similar MO and everything, but it's not one specific individual?
まだなんとも。ただ、ついさっき第7の事件が起きたようだしな。個人的には犯人は複数いると思ってる。いろいろ喋っちまった。口外したって知られたらクビになっちまう。今のはオフレコな。
Van mischievously pressed his pointer finger to his lips.
で、本題なんだが。
Yua tilted her head in surprise, as she'd been convinced the previous conversation was the reason they had summoned her here.
聞きたいことってのは学校のことなんだよ。ユアちゃんは青井瀬名って子知ってるかい？君の同級生のはずなんだが。
After some thought, Yua shook her head regretfully.
名前は聞いたことがあるような気がしますけど、話したことはありません。
ああ、そうか。
その人が犯人なんですか？
ああ、全くの別件だ。昨日徹夜したのもその子のこと調べてたからでな。
あんたさっき女子高生の生態がどうとかって。
Ban grinned and winked at the puzzled Momose, and then he swiftly turned back to face Yua.
例えば学校でものすごい手品を使う女生徒がいるって噂を聞いたことは？
いえ、ありませんけど。
さっぱり話が見えないわね。何のこと？
例えば何もない空間から剣を取り出すような手品とか。
Yua raised her head with a jolt. Her expression was filled with shock.
どうしてそれ？
Opposite her, Ban too put on a surprised face at her reaction, though he'd asked the question himself.
心当たりがあるのか？
After some hesitation, Yua nodded firmly.
どこで見た？
駅の近くの地下道です。西条くんと岸本さんが。
フェスだな。それで。
Yua summed up the chase scene that had taken place about 2 weeks ago. How she had gone to a manga cafe to see Nishijo Takumi. How he had run away from her when she approached him a little coercively. How she had frantically chased him through Shibuya, and how he'd lost her in the end. And just as she was ready to give up, she saw Takumi and Ayase entering the tunnel.
だから私、その階段の上から二人の様子をこっそり伺っていたんです。二人は階段の一番下で何か話していて。あ、どんなことを話していたかは聞き取れなかったんですけど。
I would think you'd have an easier time hearing what people in the tunnel are talking about when you're, on the steps into the tunnel.
そしたら、突然、 岸本さんが剣を何もないところから取り出したんです。すごく大きな剣でバッグにも入らないような。
まさか。
俺が見たものと同じだな。
え？
俺が見たのは岸本じゃなかったかな。さっき名前を出した青井瀬名っていう少女だ。実は葵が剣を振り回してたっていう目撃証言が渋谷のあちこちから出てる。
その手品、渋谷の若い子たちの間で流行ってるのかしら。
でも私が見たあれは手品にはとても見えませんでした。
Yeah, okay.
それに
他にも何か見たの？
信じてもらえるかどうかわからなくて、誰にもあの時岸本さんは剣を出しただけじゃなくて。
Yua cut herself off and slowly licked her lips. She appeared to be wavering over whether or not to say it. Her eyes swum around. But at last she captured Ban in her sight, as though she'd made up her mind.
二人に分身したんです。まるで本当にその場に二人いるみたいでした。私、わけがわからなくて。
Yeah, I know. Sounds very hard to believe, doesn't it? An oppressive silence filled the reception area. All three of them were embarrassed and unsure of what to say.
とにかく一体どんな種があるのかわかんねえが、そんな手品みてえな真似ができる連中がこの渋谷には何人かいるらしい。それと岸本綾瀬も青井瀬名も西条匠と接触したことは確認済みだ。これが偶然とは思えねえわけよ。
西条くん。
あの少年の周囲ではどうも現実離れしたことばかりが起きてるような気がする。
Yeah, it does seem to be the case. As Bound spoke, he suddenly recalled what he himself had said during his phone call with Sua.
怪獣か魔法使いで済ませられるならよっぽどいいけどな。
His mutter didn't reach the other two. Momose, disliking the oppressive atmosphere, slipped some of the tea her subordinate had carried over and took a breath. Next, she crafted a smile and made an attempt to change the subject by force.
ところでゆあちゃん、そのカバンにぶら下がってるカエル、最近流行ってるんでしょ？
はい。
Yua let out a relieved breath, wearing a face that said this had saved her.
なんて言うんだっけ？
ゲロカエルンです。
いろいろ種類が出てるんじゃなかった？ 10 種類ぐらい。
Wow, really? Only 10? Wasn't it supposed to be like a new one every week? Have they really only been around for like 10 weeks?
はい。私は友達からもらっただけなので詳しくは知らないんですけど。
なんだってこんな手抜き商品が流行るんだろうな。見た目だって俺の方がずっと可愛いぞ。
バンちゃん、寝言は寝てから言いなさい。
Yeah.
冗談だって。
I'm sure you were, buddy. I'm sure you were.
私も実はどうして流行っているのかよくわからないんです。
あら、結構可愛いと思うけどね。
ももちゃんの見る目も衰えたな。
世論は私の方が正しいって証明してるじゃない。バンちゃんも買いに行った方がいいわよ。
一体どこへ行けば買えるものなんだ？
ゲロカエルンの専門ショップがあちこちにあって。
専門ショップだ？
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a product that would have a specialty shop.
そこで金曜日に行列に並べば買えると思います。
金曜日？
毎週金曜日に新しいデザインのものが発売になるんです。好きな子はコンプリートとか言って 全部集めてるみたいで。
Yua was in the middle of talking, but Ban stroked his unshaven chin as he put his head together with Momose.
金曜か。流行るとは思えないものが流行ってて。G レートは毎週末に上昇する。
まさかバンちゃん。
当たってみる価値はあるかもな。
I think you would have a really hard time selling that as an idea. When I showed my face at school on Friday, Misumi suddenly invited me to go pay Ayase a visit in the hospital. He'd caught me by surprise, as it hadn't so much as occurred to me. And before I could reply, Rimi inexplicably said, "I want to come too," so I was compelled to go along with the flow and come to the hospital with them. For the record, I'm definitely not a cold person. It's just that I thought it wasn't the time or place for me to act considerate of others, now with Shogun menacing me. I don't want to die. After going in through the front entrance and reaching the lobby, Misumi looked around as if he were at a total loss.
どうしたの？
いや、岸本の病室ってどこなんだろうなって思ってよ。
Well, it seems reasonable that you'd probably have to approach reception, basically, to find that out, potentially need to, like, sign in or something. Had he come all the way here without knowing? If so, it'd be too exasperating for words.
ここは外来棟だよ。病棟は隣。
そうなのか。
大臣、しっかりしてよ。
Tokyo's AH General Hospital. It was a hospital I'd attended in the past, and I'd been back shortly before this. As a result, I was fairly familiar with what could be found here, or what could be found where. Unable to help remembering Dr. Takashina, I uttered a silent groan. Misumi turned back toward me as he started walking toward the hospital building.
で、病棟の何号室だと思う？
そんなのわかんないよ。
This was a general hospital, so it had a lot of different departments. If I were to think about it,
多分外科じゃないかな。でももしかすると精神科かも。
Ayase hadn't appeared to have taken on many external injuries when she fell, and because planning to commit suicide by jumping off must have meant she'd been driven to the brink psychologically, it would make plenty of sense for her to be in the psych ward. For some reason, even I'd been brought to a room in the psychiatric department after the commotion at Zero Front.
タクって物知りだな。
常識でしょ、常識。ね、タク。
Right, that's what we'll call it. I don't think it's quite common sense. I wouldn't have known either without the experience of having gone back and forth from this hospital countless times. Rimi halted as we were about to enter the hospital building.
私、お手洗い行ってくる。先に行ってて。
I'm sure there's plenty of bathrooms between here, the entrance, and her room, and there's probably also a bathroom in her room. If you wanted to wash your hands, there's, you know, a number of opportunities to do so without needing to do it right here at the entrance. She said, then waved a hand at us and rushed on back toward the outpatient clinic. Misumi and I thought it would be a bother to the other patients if we walked all around the hospital interior, so we ended up asking at the nurse's station. As predicted, they told us her room was on the floor for psychiatric patients. It was an individual room, about 19 square meters large. I think we might have done red last time. I really don't recall. When we entered, there was a bathroom included on the right side for the right-hand side and a bed at the very back. The light of the setting sun shone through the window beyond it. The crucial ingredient, Ayase herself, wasn't on the bed. Judging by how the sheets were mussed, she must have been there recently, but...
どこ行ったんだ？
さあ。
ま、戻ってくるまで待つか。
For some reason, Masumi started searching the room once he'd spoken. Looked like he didn't have a scrap of decency or of delicacy in him. It wouldn't be overstating things to call this Ayase's bedroom. She'd left lots of personal items and clothing lying around, and the uniquely pleasant scent of a girl's room floated in the air, mixed with the scent of disinfectant. Going in her room without permission while she was out discomforted me, making me feel like we were peeking in on her private affairs.
そういうの良くないよ。外で、待ってた方が。
If we were going to do that, we probably should have knocked on the door before just, like, walking in.
ちょっと見るだけだって。お前も知りたいと思わねえのか？フェスの私生活ってやつをよ。
Because, I mean, for all we know, you know, she could have been, like, getting changed or something. You know, if we cared about not just waltzing in and potentially making everybody feel a little uncomfortable to some extent, probably should have knocked before walking in.
興味あるだろ?
Indeed, Ayase's private affairs were enveloped in mystery. This might be a good chance to take a look. Also, I don't think you'd have a lot of personal items in a hospital room. Even if it's in the psychiatric ward and you're potentially going to be there for some sort of extended period of time, I don't think you're going to have a whole lot of your personal items just strewn about the room. Masumi didn't seem to feel the least bit of hesitation. I had second thoughts when I saw his unapologetic demeanor. I turned back toward the door to the room once, making sure no one was coming, and heart pounding, the first thing I checked out was the bed. Slightly rumpled sheets. Not quite understanding what I myself expected, I softly flipped them back and doubted my eyes. Lingerie had been hidden under the sheets, plus it was a full set, top and bottom. What appeared to be purple panties were bundled up in a casual ball, and I could only assume she'd taken them off and tossed them there. They weren't unused, she'd worn them. And this was an individual room. I couldn't imagine that anyone other than Ayase had put them on. So hot. I took a hasty glance over at Masumi, but he was reading a magazine he'd taken in hand, and he hadn't noticed the shocking sight atop the bed. My eyes went back to the lingerie. I gulped. My throat was parched. I all but unconsciously stretched trembling fingers toward the lingerie. Aware that my heartbeat was quickening, I furtively touched her panties. For some reason, there was a strange, soft sensuality to them. This is kind of weird.
それは私のお稲荷さんだ。見ろよタク、変な本があるぞ。
Musumi called to me, startling me. I was standing in a corner of the hospital room, the bed sheets hadn't been turned back, and naturally I didn't see any sexy lingerie there. Ah, a delusion. I had a sense that the final development had been unbelievably disgusting, but I decided I'd be better off not remembering. I had taken a volume from the shelf in hand and was looking at it intently.
ヌーだぜ、ヌー。この雑誌、まだ続いてたんだな。
New was a specialty publication that focused on general information about anything occult related, like UFOs, aliens, psychics, religion, urban legends, strange phenomena, advanced ancient cultures like Atlantis, and OOP arts. It made a lot of sense that Ayase, who had who only ever talked about weird stuff, would read this magazine.
こっちの文庫本は、何々グラジオールサーガファンタジー小説っぽいな。
I didn't know about that novel, but I remembered hearing the word gladiol. Where had I heard it again? I thought it had been rather recently, but...
岸本と付き合うとなると、この趣味に合わせないといけねえのか。大変そうだぜ、これは。
You don't need to necessarily match these tastes. Obviously, you're going to want to probably have some stuff in common, but you don't necessarily need to match these particular tastes. Had he still not given up on dating Kishimoto yet, even though she'd rejected him with the instant KO before?
Huh?
No, only now do we see it. I abruptly noticed that Ayase's D-sword was propped up by the window. Its form resembled a battleship in a sci-fi movie. No matter when I looked at it, it was a badass sword furnished with both beauty and cruelty. It was simply sitting there, but it gave off the same amazing sense of presence as ever. Misumi didn't appear to have noticed the sword. Ordinary people couldn't see it after all. If I took it away without saying anything to Ayase, would it become my sword? If it meant I could get my hands on a D-sword without any effort, this wasn't the time to care about appearances. Desire rose within me. I gulped and timidly reached my hand toward the sword. I gripped its handle. I had meant to grip the handle, but my hand passed through it. All my fingers closed around was air. I tried it again, but the result was the same. I couldn't grasp it. I couldn't even touch it. Did that mean this sword wasn't real booted now? Because it hadn't achieved local shared recognition? It remained as nothing more than a delusion of Ayase's? A delusion, a dream, an afterimage.
何やってんだお前。
Just being weird. That's all. Misumi put on a puzzled face when he saw me. 10 minutes passed, but Ayase still showed no signs of returning. Nor did Rimi. She was supposed to have gone to the bathroom, show up. What? She was supposed to have gone to the bathroom, show up. I wondered where she'd gone. That doesn't make any sense. That line feels like it's missing something.
リミってこの病室の場所知ってたか
There's nothing stopping her from asking a nurse herself. We asked about the location of the hospital room at the nurse's station after parting from Rimi. Maybe she was wandering around somewhere, unsure of where to go. If she really needs to know, she could just ask. Like anybody.
あいつバカだからな。俺たちみたいに誰かに聞こうって発想がないのかもしんねえぞ。
Really?
探しに。
I'd be insecure if Rimi weren't with me. I couldn't state for sure that even this hospital was safe. If Shogun were peeping in on my thoughts, he must know about my being here.
そうだな。待つのも飽きたし、タクもあいつがいないと寂しいだろうからな。
Oh. Yes, we are oh so lonely.
なあ、ぶっちゃけ、リミとはどうなんだ
え？
付き合ってんのかって聞いてんだよ。お前ら、最近結構いい感じじゃね？
付き合ってないよ。
My face went hot as I spoke. Me and Rimi going out? Huh. I'd certainly envisioned it countless times. I hadn't had any interest in the third dimension, but Rimi's existence was starting to occupy more and more space inside me. But when Rimi said, "I'll be there for you," she'd also said,
そんなの友達だからに決まってるでしょ。
In other words, she only saw me as a friend. Of course, she wouldn't think of becoming involved in a romantic relationship with an otaku creep like me. Anyway, Rimi was dense when it came to that sort of thing. Misumi and I split up to look for Rimi and Ayase. Misumi had gone down the stairs, so I decided to search on the upper floors.
Amisha! Roha! Amisha!
In the hallway, I passed an aging inpatient who looked to be in his 50s. As he tottered along, he never stopped calling a person named... I assume that's supposed to be he never stopped calling for a person named Ami. Ignoring him, I continued toward the far end of the corridor. I didn't have that much resistance to the idea of walking around the hospital. It must have been because I had often come here in the past. Except, my heart pounded at the thought that Shogun might appear around corners in the hallway or from inside hospital bedrooms with flung open doors. Besides, the strange, scream-like cries I heard once in a while from somewhere or other were bad for my heart. The corridor was completely cream-colored. Some of the hospital rooms had their doors open, and some didn't. I peeked into many of them to make sure Shogun wasn't there. The 2 beds were lined up in all the rooms, with human shapes puffed up under the sheets. Patients were probably sleeping there, except their faces were in my blind spot, and I couldn't see them. Few people were walking down the hallway. The aging man who called Ami and a single nurse at present, those 2 were the only ones I'd passed. For some reason, I felt like I didn't really want to be here. The atmosphere was weighty. It wasn't unpleasant, but I got the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. As I went further, the hall turned as if it were breaking to the right. While I tentatively rounded the corner, I wondered if hospital rooms continued beyond there. Without warning, there was a wall in front of me. Moreover, as if the cream color throughout the rest of the hallway had been a lie, only the area at the end of the turn was coated in black paint. For some reason, my pulse quickened. I became incapable of moving a single step away. My vision shook dizzily. I thought it was vertigo and closed my eyes, but when I rubbed the tops of my eyelids with my fingers, my eyeballs were twitching. Icy chills came crawling up from my feet. Forgetting to breathe, I stood in place. I looked at the black before me. It seemed as if it would suck me in. It seemed as if it would swallow me. Everywhere, a deep black. Even though nothing should have been there, someone was watching me from somewhere. God's gaze penetrated the back of my neck. Its presence was beyond comparison to when I was in my base. Don't look. Using all the emotional strength left in me, I closed my eyes. The instant, I became able to breathe and wheezed as I retreated. As I continued, I lowered my face and went back down the hallway as though fleeing. Panting, I hurried back to the floor with Ayase's hospital room. When I touched the nape of my neck, sticky sweat had started oozing out. Not just my neck, my whole body was sweaty. What the hell was it? Shogun looking in my thoughts? God's gaze wouldn't go away. The difficulty I had breathing and my chills wouldn't lessen. My mood withered all at once. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to have Rimi accompany me, and I wanted to shut myself up in my base. For starters, far from being pleased, Ayase would get aggravated if the likes of me visiting her in the hospital. It was idiotic of me to tag along for Misumi's visit, given his blatant ulterior motives. Then I'll go home, before Shogun and Yua appear. They came and went without warning. They pinned down my location with ease. I had to stay braced no matter where I went. I swayed along, aiming for Ayase's hospital room, holding a hand up to the wall as I went, praying that I would be able to join up with Rimi. I slowly crept along.
山井さんがまたアミーちゃんっていう名前を呼んでたんですよ。
I heard a nurse talking from ahead. When I looked up, 2 nurses were walking this way. One was still young, while the other was a plump, middle-aged lady.
一体誰のことを探してるのか。
それ、この病院に伝わる怪談よ。誰も知らない幻の病室があって、そこにアミーちゃんが入院してるらしいわ。 もう何年も前からある噂。
I faced down and waited for the two of them to pass me by. I held my breath to keep them from noticing my wild panting. I could tell they were looking at me with unconcealed suspicion, but for now, all I could do was ignore them. After passing the two nurses and walking even more desperately, I reached the nurses' station. I should have reached Ayase's hospital room before this, but apparently I'd overshot it. I clicked my tongue and wiped sweat off my forehead. I sensed someone watching me again. The depths of my chest throbbed painfully. My ears were ringing too. I felt incredibly sick. My body was in the worst possible condition. Though it hadn't been like this when I arrived here, what was happening to me? It was amazingly agonizing, and I couldn't put up with it any longer. And I went to seek help from the nurses in the nurses' station. But only one was there. She stood with her back to me, seeming not to realize I was there, and muttered something as she immersed herself in her work. She had a clipboard in hand. Something was written on the paper stuck in it. Okay. I'd met her a number of times before, Nurse Suzuki. Of course, this was AH General Hospital Psychiatric Department. It was natural for her to be here. I myself had been under her care twice in only the past month. That was convenient. If I addressed her, she'd soon come to attend to me. Right then, a sound rang out. The kind of call that would give anyone an abrupt sense of strain. Startled, Suzuki set her clipboard down and manipulated something on the switchboard by her hands. The sound of the call soon cut off. It must have been some patient summoning her, since she hurriedly flew out of the nurse's station. Why didn't she take any notice of me, even though I'd been in terrible pain close behind her? I couldn't stay standing. I was horribly dizzy. Helpless, I entered the nurse's station to await her return. Finding a stool where Hazuki had previously been standing, I sat down on it. My head ached, similar to during the earthquake last week. But I thought the nature of the back pain that then had differed. I wanted to drink something. Perhaps because I'd been panting repeatedly, breathing alone was enough to make my throat hurt. I looked around idly. The clipboard Hazuki had been carrying, the drawing on it, entered my field of sight. As she helped to examine me, Hazuki was always writing something down on this clipboard, a gentle smile on her face. I'd thought it'd be temperature measurements or the names of medications for, the names of medicines for prescriptions. Which is why I couldn't comprehend why it was drawn there.
これって
Somewhere before, I'd seen this crappy doodle. Where? Where had I seen it? My head hurt, a stabbing pain, a tingling sensation at the back of my neck. Don't look at me. I took the clipboard in hand. Several papers that looked like patient records were held there. I flipped the first page. The exact same crappy drawing on the second page. I turned still more pages. The same on the third page. And the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. All of them were scribbles repeating the same drawing. This drawing was... the staking. And on the seventh page was... whose eyes are those eyes? Okay, well, that is going to be it for this part. I will see you all next time. Until then, quick reminder that I do have a Patreon as well as a Streamlabs donation link down below in the description. Those are the two best ways to support the channel if you wish to go ahead and do so. It is entirely up to you, of course. Also down there in the description is a link to my Discord server. That is my go-to place for posting about anything that's going on with the channel, such as changes to my recording or streaming schedule or whatever the case may be. If you want to stay up to date with that type of stuff, I do highly recommend that you go ahead and join that as well. You do not have to be active in it. I'm not active in most of the servers that I'm a part of. I'm mostly just there to get news. It's perfectly fine if that is the whole reason for why you go and join the Discord server, is because you want to stay up to date on the news, but you don't necessarily care to interact and be an active member of the community. Perfectly acceptable to me, because like I said, I'm like that on most of the servers that I'm a part of. But that's going to be it for this video. I will see you all next time. Until then, goodbye and farewell.